I never thought that a family barbecue, something so ordinary, so ours, would end with me gasping for breath, clawing at the surface of a lake while my grandson laughed. Kyle, my sweet Kyle, or at least that's who he used to be. At 19, he stood tall with a grin that didn't reach his eyes and pushed me, his own grandmother, straight into the water. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't roughhousing gone too far. It was deliberate, calculated, cruel. I heard his voice even before I felt the shove. "Come on, Grandma. Let's see if you can swim like you used to." Then cold hands on my back. A shove. My body twisted and I screamed, but it was too late. My feet left the dock. I hit the water like a stone. The shock stole my breath. My limbs froze. My chest burned as I tried to scream again, but only swallowed more lake water. I hadn't swum in over 30 years. After my surgery, the doctor told me not to risk it. Not with my brittle shoulder and fading coordination. But no one moved. Not one person on that dock so much as flinched. I flailed and thrashed, panic surging through me as the water dragged me under. When I surfaced, coughing and sputtering, I caught a glimpse of their faces. Kyle standing there, arms folded, laughing with his friends. My son, his father, just watching. And my daughter-in-law sipping wine, muttering, "She's being dramatic." I don't even remember how I got out. I think it was instinct, fear, maybe some small reserve of strength I didn't know I still had. When I finally crawled up to the dock, soaked and shaking, my knees scraped raw and my heart thudding painfully in my chest. No one helped me, no one. Kyle looked down at me and smirked. "Guess you can swim after all. Tough old bird, huh?" They all laughed. That laughter echoed in my ears long after the moment passed. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just stood up, water dripping from my clothes, humiliated beyond words. I saw Dolores in my mind then, her voice from last week saying, "People show their true colors when they think you need them." I walked back toward the picnic table, soaked and aching. They returned to grilling burgers, opening another bottle of wine like nothing had happened, like I hadn't almost died for their entertainment. No apology, no concern, and I thought I knew this was it. This was the moment the wolf finally pulled off my eyes. The moment I stopped making excuses for their behavior. The moment I stopped clinging to the memory of the little boy who used to bring me wildflowers from the yard. Kyle was gone. What stood in his place was a boy shaped by people who valued image over empathy, who taught him cruelty could pass for confidence, who let him believe love came with no consequences. I sat there in my dripping clothes, silent. That silence, it used to be mistaken for weakness. Not anymore. This time it was a promise, a warning, a beginning. Because as I looked at that dock, my family laughing, my body aching, my heart splintered, I realized something they didn't. I still had choices. That boy forgot who held his fun for the future. Back at the house, I peeled off the wet clothes and dried myself in the bathroom with a threadbare towel I always kept for guests, the one no one else touched. I looked in the mirror, hair tangled, knees scraped, eyes bloodshot from the lake water. I looked like a ghost, and yet, when I stepped back into the kitchen, there they were chatting about vacation plans, laughing over flights to Cancun, arguing over which Airbnb had a better view. No one turned to look at me. No one asked how I felt. No one so much as offered a dry blanket. Kyle was scrolling through his phone barefoot, his damp swim trunks leaving little puddles on my clean floor. My son leaned against the counter, sipping the lemonade I made that morning. And my daughter-in-law, that polished statue of indifference, was showing off a slideshow of beach resorts to Kyle like today was just another sunny afternoon. It was like I was invisible. I sat at the edge of the breakfast table, my bones still shaking from the cold, my cardigan stuck to my back, but no one saw. No one cared. I wanted to scream, not out of pain, but disbelief. How did we get here? There was a time, God help me, I remember it, when Kyle would wrap his arms around my neck and say, "You're the best part of this house, Grandma." I remember Sunday mornings with pancakes and cartoons, his little head resting against my arm. Now he mimicked drowning to his friends and laughed when I struggled for air. It didn't happen overnight. That cruelty had to be learned. And I knew exactly where he learned it. From the smirks, the eye rolls, the times his parents dismissed my concerns, made fun of my old-fashioned ways, the way they talked about me when they thought I was asleep, the way they used my home, my money, my time, until I became more of an inconvenience than a person. Now I sat there in my own kitchen, shivering while they planned their next escape. I let the silence stretch, let it choke the air. I wanted to see if any of them would notice. They didn't, so I stood quiet, calm like always. I walked to my bedroom, closed the door gently, and sat on the edge of the bed where I used to read Kyle bedtime stories. The lake water was gone from my skin, but not from my heart. That stayed, that shame, that burn, and I realized I'd been drying off from their behavior for years. Every time they forgot my birthday, every time they asked for money without thanks, every time I was talked over, dismissed, laughed at, that push into the lake. That was just the first time they did it in public. I took out my journal and wrote just one sentence. They will never get the chance to drown me again. Because starting tonight, I wasn't just drying off. I was waking up. That night, long after the house went still, I sat alone in my room with the door locked, the old lamp humming softly beside me. I couldn't sleep, not with that image of Kyle, my Kyle laughing as I struggled to stay afloat. It haunted me, not because it was cruel, but because it was him. I raised that boy not just as a grandmother, not as some doting holiday visitor. No, I raised him when his parents couldn't be bothered. When his father lost his job for the third time and the bank came knocking, guess where Kyle ended up? In this house, in my arms. I fed him, bathed him, read to him, comforted him through night terrors. I put his name on every emergency contact form, paid his school tuition when his parents were too tight on funds. I built his world. I still remember the day he got his first piano keyboard. I bought it secondhand from a music teacher who was retiring. I spent half my savings on it, and he sat cross-legged on the floor for hours, pressing each key like it was magic. "Grandma," he said, "this is better than Christmas." I remember thinking, this child, he feels deeply. Where did that boy go? I thought back to how things started shifting when he turned 16. The phone never left his hand. He stopped sitting at the table. His thank yous turned into grunts. Eye contact gone. At first I chalked it up to age. Teenagers are moody. I told myself, he still loves you. He's just growing, but that wasn't it. He didn't just grow. He morphed. Little things gave it away. Snide jokes, mocking how I stirred my tea, rolling his eyes when I told stories. I should have said something then. I should have confronted him. But I didn't want to rock the boat. I didn't want to lose him. Instead, I lost myself. I let him talk over me. I let his parents laugh when he dismissed me. I let myself fade into the wallpaper of my own home. The boy who once cried when I scraped my knee in the garden, who used to kiss my cheek and ask if angels aged, was now a stranger in my kitchen making jokes about drowning me. And maybe the worst part, I still wanted to believe there was some of that boy left. But tonight, I let that fantasy go. I closed the last photo album I had of him, pages of gap-toothed smiles and birthday candles, and put it on the shelf. Not to forget, but to protect myself, because love without boundaries isn't love. It's servitude, and I've served enough. Let his parents clean up what they created. Let them brag about his college applications, his Instagram followers, his sense of humor. The next morning, I told everything to Dolores because in that moment, I needed comfort. I needed someone who would just listen, and Dolores always did. Dolores has been my best friend for 30 years. We've weathered countless storms together, and she's been by my side through every high and low. The next morning, there was a knock at my kitchen door. Not the front one, never the front. Dolores had always come through the side like she owned the place. "Open up, Margaret. I brought muffins and opinions." I smiled before I even got to the door. There she was in her oversized sunglasses and turquoise windbreaker, clutching a brown paper bag and 2 coffee cups like she was storming a battlefield. I didn't even get a word out before she said, "You look like hell. Sit, I'll pour." I sat. Because with Dolores, you don't argue, you receive. "They did something," she said. "Didn't they?" I nodded, just once. That was all it took. She didn't gasp or say, "Oh, honey," like most people would. She leaned forward, planted her elbows on the table and said, "Then it's time." "Time? Time for what?" I asked. She pulled something from her bag. Not a muffin, not a napkin, a folder. My lawyer's card and a list of every account you told me about last year when we did your taxes. I stared at her. "You kept that?" "I keep everything," she said. Especially when my best friend is handing out her love and legacy like Halloween candy to people who'd shove her into a lake. I looked down at the card. Peter Holloway, estate law, clean font, firm handshake type. "I don't know," I said quietly. "It feels final." Dolores leaned back, crossed her arms, and tilted her head. You want final? You just don't want guilt. That's different. She took a sip of her coffee and tapped the table. Listen to me. You paid for Kyle's school. You paid for his braces, his damn piano, his soccer trips. You let his parents live rent-free in your lake house one whole summer, and you still had to buy your own groceries that August. I wanted to help, I murmured. I know you did. You're better than them. That's the problem. I stared out the window. The aylas were blooming. Cliff planted them for our anniversary. He always said they were stubborn flowers, slow to open, but impossible to kill. I felt like that now. I don't want revenge, I said. Dolores reached across and squeezed my hand. Of course not. You want release. And she was right. I didn't want to scream or burn the house down or march into Kyle's room and demand an apology he didn't even believe I deserved. I wanted the peace that comes when you finally stop begging to be seen. Dolores stood and pulled me up by the shoulders. We're going into town. You're going to eat something that didn't come out of a box, and then we're calling Peter. I haven't been to that cafe in months, I admitted. Perfect, she said, grabbing her keys. Let them see what strength looks like in cardigans and crow's feet. As we drove, windows down, the wind tangled in my thinning hair, I realized something simple, something that stopped me in my tracks. I hadn't felt this alive in years, and all it took was someone reminding me I was still mine. The cafe was crowded, the clatter of dishes and low hum of conversation wrapping around me like a worn quilt. Dolores stirred sugar into her espresso with purpose, like she was mixing a potion, then slid the second cup across the table to me. Drink up, you're going to need backbone and caffeine. She wasn't wrong. We had called Peter Holloway right after lunch. He told me to come in that afternoon, said, bring everything you've got, and don't sugarcoat it. I didn't. I brought the original trust documents, the binder Cliff and I had assembled after his stroke, and a folded copy of the university fund letter back when Kyle was still in middle school, still excited to show me his report cards. I remembered printing that letter. How proud I was, how hopeful. $50,000, I murmured as Peter flipped through it. I started putting it aside when he was 10. Birthday money, bonuses, tax returns, even skipped a vacation one year. Cliff and I agreed. Education first. Peter looked up from the papers, brows furrowed. It's all still there, untouched. He hasn't needed it yet. No, I said, voice hollow. He's in community college right now. Says he wants to transfer next year. That was always the plan until he decided I didn't belong on a dock or in his life. Peter didn't ask questions. He just nodded like a surgeon would before operating. What do you want to do, Margaret? He asked. Change the beneficiary, redirect the funds, close it entirely. I stared at the ceiling for a moment, then whispered, nothing. Not yet, Peter raised an eyebrow. I want to watch, I said. I want to see how they treat me when they think I'm frail, when they believe they're this close to inheriting. I want to see who pretends to care and who actually shows up. He closed the file slowly. That's cold. It's survival, Dolores leaned in. We're not burning bridges today, Peter. We're just checking which ones were never real in the first place. Peter smiled faintly. Fair enough. We left his office an hour later with everything legally intact, but my perspective permanently shifted. That fund wasn't a gift anymore. It was a mirror. I spent the rest of the evening at home, walking from room to room like I was inspecting a life I no longer lived in. I paused by the mantel where Kyle's baby photo still stood. Those dimples, that grin, that sense of safety. I didn't take it down. I wasn't ready yet. Instead, I sat at the kitchen table and opened a fresh page in my journal. At the top, I wrote, "Let's see who loves me without the money." Underneath that, I made 2 columns, who notices and who avoids. Kyle's name didn't even have to be written. I already knew where it would end up. This wasn't vengeance. This was clarity, because for all their planning, for all their whispered schemes about who would get what when I was too tired to manage it, they forgot one thing. I still have the pen. And I'm not done writing the ending. I started small, a stumble here, a slower step there. I'd pause mid-sentence and touch my forehead like I forgot what I was saying. I let my hands tremble a little when pouring tea, just enough to make the cup rattle against the saucer. And the effect was immediate. Not concern, not kindness, annoyance. Kyle stopped saying hi when he walked in the door. Now it was just a grunt. If I asked for help carrying groceries in, He'd sigh so loudly you'd think I'd asked him to lift a car. My son Daniel started whispering in the kitchen when he thought I was asleep. She's getting worse. I don't think she's taking her meds. I can't keep cleaning up after her. His wife Paula, always quick to put on a concerned face around church friends, didn't even bother behind closed doors. She left the stove on again, she said one night too loudly and too falsely. That's dangerous, Dan. What if Kyle was here alone? He was always here alone. But no one ever worried about him. The thing is, I never left the stove on. I checked it twice, then again before bed. But I didn't argue. I just let them believe it. Let them build their case for my decline. They thought they were playing chess. They didn't realize I was playing a longer game. At night, I would lie in bed and listen to the muffled voices through the wall. They never said my name. Just her and she. She needs help. She's becoming a burden. She doesn't even know how to keep track of her own money. That last one nearly made me laugh out loud. I kept the ledgers in my sock drawer. Every transaction, every account, balanced to the penny. The university funds still untouched. The home equity still in my name. And yet, they counted me out like I was already gone. One morning, I walked into the kitchen to find Kyle and Paula at the table whispering. They froze when they saw me, but not before I heard the word facility. Kyle looked at me like I was an object. She didn't hear that, he said. I poured my coffee slowly, let the silence settle thick between us. I stared out the window at the garden cliff, and I had built from nothing, our sanctuary. The hydrangeas were blooming again, stubborn things just like us. I'm old, I said aloud to no one in particular. But I'm not deaf. Neither of them responded. That's when I knew they were trying to push me out before I could draw a boundary. So I'd let them keep thinking I was slipping. Let them talk. Let them whisper. I made myself smaller in their eyes so that soon I could disappear entirely. And when I did, they'd feel that silence like thunder. That night, I opened my journal again, drew a little line next to Kyle's name in the Who Avoids column, underlined it twice. Next to Daniel and Paula's names, I wrote, They want the house, not the woman in it. I closed the book and smiled in the dark. Let them whisper because I was listening to every word. A week later, I had the last moment that pushed me over the line. It was Paula's idea. Some kind of casual dinner for her friends from the yoga studio and Daniel's work buddies. We'll grill. Keep it light. Maybe you can make that lemon cake they love. I said nothing. I baked the cake anyway out of habit, maybe out of sentiment, but I didn't plan on staying long. The house smelled like grilled meat and rosé perfume. Laughter spilled from the back patio like smoke, thin, rising, suffocating. I stayed in the kitchen away from the crowd. No one noticed, not even Daniel, who used to peek in to ask if I needed help with the dishes when he was 12. I stood by the sink, just out of view, listening. Always listening. Then I heard Kyle's voice loud, icy, dripping with that smug sarcasm he'd inherited from Paula. So get this, he said to the circle of half-tipsy guests. Grandma fell in the lake at the barbecue. She flailed around like a flipped turtle. All help me, laughter. Real belly-deep laughter. He kept going and I'm like, dude, you're not actually drowning. She was probably angling for sympathy. You know how old people are. They weaponize helplessness. Someone chuckled and muttered, That's dark, Kyle. Kyle laughed harder. Nah, she's fine. Tough old bird. Tough old bird. That's what he saw when he looked at me. Not the woman who paid for his braces. Not the one who stayed up nights with him during his asthma spells. Not the one who kept every damn drawing he ever made in a binder under her bed. Just a bird. I stood frozen behind the sliding glass door, my hands trembling. Not from age, but rage. Then I heard Paula's voice, soft and cutting like a scalpel. She's a liability, she said. Not family, I told Daniel. We need to think about the future, not sentiment. Liability. It wasn't the first time I'd felt disposable. But this time it was final. I walked to my room calmly. Not a single tear, not a word to them. I sat down on the bed, the voices muffled by the closed door, and I felt something shift in me. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't even heartbroken. I was done. It was the clarity I'd been waiting for, the confirmation, the signature on the invisible contract they'd written the day Kyle pushed me into that lake. I opened my bedside drawer and pulled out the envelope with Peter's card. I picked up my phone and stared at the number. Then I dialed. Peter Halloway, he answered on the second ring. It's Margaret. I'm ready. He didn't ask what I meant. He just said, come in tomorrow. Bring the documents. Bring your ID, I said. I already have. When I hung up, I walked back into the hallway. The sound of their laughter was fainter now, like it belonged to strangers. The lemon cake still sat untouched on the counter. I took a knife and cut one perfect slice. Not for them, for me. I sat at the kitchen table alone and ate it slowly. Let them tell their stories. Let them drink and toast and gossip. Let them pretend I was invisible, because starting tomorrow, they'd find out just how invisible I could become. And when the silence came, real silence, it wouldn't be weakness. It would be my exit. I didn't sleep that night. I sat at the small desk in my room, the same one I used to help Kyle write his college essays on, and opened my laptop. The website for the Scholarship Foundation was already bookmarked. Cliff and I had supported them for years. It was quiet, efficient, and noble. Their motto, education should be earned, not inherited. I typed steadily, deliberately. Amount to donate $50,000. Donor name, in memory of Clifford James Walker. Designation, STEM Scholarship Fund for first-generation students. Anonymous. Yes. Before I clicked confirm, I paused. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. I thought of Kyle at 9 years old, grinning with missing teeth, saying, "Grandma, when I grow up, I want to make machines that help people breathe better." He doesn't say things like that anymore. He doesn't say anything at all. Confirm. It was done. No second login needed. No confirmation email to wait for. Just a clean, permanent transfer. I closed the tab and didn't look back. Then I opened another window. Amrak this time. One-way ticket, departure Sunday. Destination, Silver Pines, a quiet retirement community 2 states away. Dolores had a friend there who described it as peaceful but not dead. It had a garden, a shared workshop, and residents who played chess without cheating. Perfect. I picked the earliest morning train, quiet, unnoticed. While the house slept, I packed lightly. 1 small suitcase, 3 sweaters, my gardening gloves, Cliff's flannel, the leather journal, and a photo of me holding baby Kyle. Just one. The valuables were already gone. The documents were already secure. What I left behind were just shells, clothes I hadn't worn in years, kitchen appliances they never thanked me for using, birthday cards with my handwriting that got tossed into drawers. Let them keep all that. Let them sort through my old life like vultures circling something they helped kill. "I'm heading out this weekend with Dolores," I said, standing in the kitchen doorway Friday evening. "She wants company on a little road trip." Daniel didn't even look up from his phone. "Cool," Kyle muttered, brushing past me on his way to the fridge. Paula was the only one who responded, and even then it was a hollow, distracted, "drive safe," while she folded laundry like she was more worried about mixing whites and colors than my actual departure. Not one of them asked where. Not one asked why. Not a single person offered to carry my bag. And I realized this wasn't just neglect. It was calculation. They were done pretending. In their minds, I had already been boxed up, labeled, and shelved. Grandma's just old. She probably won't be around much longer. I could practically hear their thoughts. Let her go. We'll be here when the will reads out. The suitcase sat by the front door all evening. I watched them glance at it. Not one of them asked when I'd be back. They probably assumed I wouldn't. And honestly, they were right. The only false note in this trip was that I called it a weekend. But I wasn't coming back. Not to this house. Not to these people. That night, I sat on the edge of my bed and stared at the walls. Walls that had once been filled with Kyle's laughter, with handprints from painting projects, with Cliff's humming while he fixed the molding. Now they were silent, cold, watching me go. The alarm went off at 5:30 a.m. I moved like I was slipping through time, brushed my hair, folded the blanket on my bed, wrote nothing, said nothing. Dolores pulled up at 6 Tau, sharp, headlights low, engine rumbling like a secret ready to be kept. I stood for a moment in the living room, looking at the house that had held my life and the people who slowly drained the meaning out of it. There was no pain, only space. I walked out the front door, suitcase in hand, closing it quietly behind me. No one stirred, not even Kyle. As Dolores drove toward the station, she glanced at me. "They didn't ask where you were going, did they?" I shook my head. "Didn't even look up." She made a noise in her throat. A bitter chuckle, maybe. "Imagine that. You disappear and no one even notices." "I prefer it this way," I said. And I did. At the train station, we hugged. Dolores pressed a small envelope into my hand. "Just in case," she said. I nodded. We didn't cry. Women like us who've seen births and deaths and the spaces in between, We don't cry over freedom. The train pulled in with a low roar. I boarded with my small suitcase and sat by the window. As the town faded behind me, replaced by trees and sky and the unknown, I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding for decades. This wasn't a getaway, it was a rebirth. And back in that quiet house, they wouldn't even notice I was missing until the towels ran out, the freezer was empty, and the woman they once called Grandma had stopped being convenient. They didn't see me off, but they'd feel my absence. And that's a goodbye they'd never forget. Silver Pines was quiet. Not the lonely kind of quiet, the peaceful kind. Birdsong in the morning, shuffling slippers in the hallway. The soft murmur of classical music from the neighbor's unit filled the air. My room was small but clean. A bed by the window, a bookshelf, and a chair that didn't creak when I sat in it. I hung Cliff's flannel on the hook by the door. I set the photo of Kyle as a baby by the windowsill, not as an invitation for memories, but as a monument. I looked at that photo and finally saw the truth. He was just a boy I loved, not a man who deserved to own me. That afternoon, I sat at the desk and began the letter. Not to Kyle alone, but to all of them, Daniel, Paula, and Kyle. I wrote their names at the top like it was an obituary. And then I began. I was the one who stayed up when Kyle couldn't sleep. I was the one who paid for his school, his shoes, his future. I was the one who never missed a birthday. Even when you forgot mine, I listened. I waited, I hoped, and in return you mocked my fear. You minimized my needs. You treated my presence like clutter. You laughed when I drowned. I stopped writing for a moment and placed my hand over my heart. It wasn't racing, not like it used to when I confronted them out loud. It beat calmly, steady. I picked the pen back up. This isn't vengeance. I'm not punishing you, but I will no longer fund people who see my love as leverage. The university fund is gone. The inheritance will follow. I've given enough, and now I choose peace. At the bottom, I didn't write, "Love, Grandma." I signed my full name, Margaret Elizabeth Walker, because that's who they forgot existed. Not just Grandma, not just Mom, but a woman, a full one. I folded the letter fully, placed it in an envelope with no return address. I included no gifts, no money, no photos, just truth. I walked to the post office at the corner, mailed it first class, and didn't look back. On the way home, I stopped at the garden. A few of the residents had started a small patch of vegetables. An older man was planting tomatoes, his hands deep in the soil. He looked up and nodded. "First year here?" "Yes," I said. "Good place," he said simply. "No one asked you to prove your worth here." I smiled. Truly smiled. That's why I came. When I got back to my room, I made a cup of tea and watched the wind move through the trees. I didn't check my phone. I hadn't brought one. If they needed to talk, they'd have to do it without tracking, without expectation, because I had said all I needed to say, and this time they'd have to sit with it. It took exactly 5 days. 5 days from when I mailed that letter to when the first ripple hit. Peter told me afterward in one of his rare chuckling emails that Daniel came into the office looking, quote, 10 years older and 20 pounds of panic lighter. Apparently, the letter had arrived at breakfast. Kyle opened it expecting maybe a check, a sentimental note, or instructions on how to claim his money. Instead, he found my handwriting laid out like a mirror. No screaming, no begging, just facts. And the one line that probably knocked the air out of him. The university fund is gone. Redirected to a foundation that values decency over entitlement. Peter said Kyle turned red. Paula started swearing. And Daniel kept repeating the same thing like a broken record. But we thought she'd wait. Wait for what? To be respected? To be useful enough? To be dead? No, I had done enough waiting. That day, Peter delivered the rest. Official documents. Confirmation that the fund was no longer theirs to claim, that I had removed all digital access, and that all correspondence now had to go through him. "I'm afraid she's listed herself as unreachable," Peter told them. "She's well within her rights." I didn't hear their screaming, but I could imagine it. Paula pacing the kitchen, furious that her careful planning just fell apart. Daniel rubbing his temples, realizing that his fallback plan vanished. And Kyle, poor Kyle, realizing that mocking someone into silence doesn't work when that someone leaves the room entirely. No email, no phone number, no address, just absence. That evening, I sat on my new little balcony with a blanket over my knees, tea in hand, watching a pair of sparrows argue over a flower pot. It was peaceful, not quiet in the lonely way, but the earned kind of quiet, The kind you sit inside because you've done the screaming already. I didn't feel guilty. I didn't wonder if I'd gone too far, because for the first time, the distance between us was honest. I had not disappeared. I had withdrawn. They wanted me quiet, small, compliant. Now they had it, just not in the way they expected. No more help with bills, no emergency loans, no last-minute babysitting, no college fund, just silence, just space. And me, Margaret Elizabeth Walker, still breathing, still living, just elsewhere. They'd call it abandonment. They'd tell people I lost it, that I ran away. Let them. Because someday when the dust settles, they'll remember that I gave everything until it nearly killed me. And then I stopped. Not because I was cruel, but because I finally understood. You don't have to set yourself on fire to keep people warm. And I refused to be their matchstick ever again. Peter forwarded me the first email 3 days later. Subject line, urgent. Please call us, Mom. It was from Daniel, full of panicked sentences and poor punctuation. We just need to talk. We're not mad. We're just really confused. We didn't know you were upset. Kyle's distraught. Please just let us explain. Explain what? That I imagined the water in my lungs? That I misunderstood their laughter? That being called a liability wasn't what it sounded like? They didn't want to talk. They wanted access. Peter asked if I wanted him to reply. I told him no. Let them sit in the echo of their own silence. That same week, they called the bank, tried to access accounts, denied. They emailed the Scholarship Foundation, denied. And then came the boldest move yet. They reported me missing. An officer actually showed up at Peter's office, asking if there was any concern for my safety. Peter, bless him, handed over the documentation. Margaret Walker is of sound mind, left by choice, and is under no legal obligation to inform people she's protecting herself from. They tried again the next day, this time with Kyle calling. Peter didn't answer. He sent me an update with the subject line, "They're scrambling." I didn't open it right away. I sat with the knowledge, not because I needed to enjoy their panic, but because I needed to believe in my right to walk away. There's a strange guilt that settles in when you stop mothering people who've grown addicted to your silence. It comes in waves. Maybe I was too harsh. Maybe they didn't mean it. Maybe they'll change. But guilt is just the price you pay when you've been taught that love should hurt. And I'm not paying that price anymore. I didn't respond. I didn't flinch. Instead, I spent the day in the garden, digging my fingers into warm soil and planting seeds like I was daring the earth to begin again with me. That evening, Dolores called. "They're spiraling," she said, words getting around. Paula's yoga friends are starting to whisper. One of them asked if you had dementia. I laughed. Not the polite kind, the freeing kind. Well, I said, I must be the most organized dementia patient they've ever seen. Dolores paused. You sure you're okay with them thinking you're gone? I stared out the window at the sun setting over a bed of marigolds. I'm not gone, I said. I'm just not available, because that's the truth, isn't it? They wanted me to be a quiet fixture in the background. Always ready, never needed. Convenient, disposable. Now I'm gone, but not missing. They didn't lose me. They drove me out. And now that they can't find me, they're finally trying to listen. But it's too late for conversations. This isn't a standoff. It's a departure. And for the first time, they're not the ones choosing when it ends. Peter called it the moment the floor gave out. He'd gathered them into his office, the three of them, because they refused to believe it until they heard it from someone with a title. In a desk, Daniel came in tight-jawed. Paula wore her best, I'm about to play victim card again. And Kyle? Well, Kyle looked like a little boy again. Not because he felt remorse, but because for the first time, the world wasn't bending to him. Peter had prepared a short statement per my instructions. No small talk, no explanations, just the truth. He slid the folder across the table, looked each of them in the eye, and said, This is from Margaret Walker. Then he read, To those who assumed my silence meant agreement, I gave everything once. I won't die twice, that line stopped them. You took my time, my home, my peace. You drained me while telling others you were looking after me. You mocked me as I drowned, then wondered why I didn't come up gasping for your approval. So let me be clear. The university fund is gone. The inheritance has been restructured. The house will be donated. My assets will not go to those who treated me like clutter waiting to be cleared. Daniel apparently tried to interrupt, but Peter raised a hand. She gave me full authority to read every word. He continued, You will receive nothing from me in death, because you gave me nothing of value in life, not love, not respect, not care. You loved my money more than you loved me. And now the money is with those who still believe in kindness. Paula, according to Peter, turned red and then white. Kyle muttered something under his breath, but no one listened. Peter told me Daniel stood up and shouted, "She's lost her mind," to which Peter replied, "No, she found it." When Peter sent me the full transcript later that week, I read it slowly. Sipping tea in the garden with my feet tucked under a blanket, Dolores crocheted. Every word felt like breath, like oxygen. It wasn't revenge. It was recording. They had written the story. I just turned the last page. In their world, I was supposed to forgive quietly, give endlessly, and fade gently. But I didn't. I spoke. I left. I reallocated my love to those who still wanted it, not those who expected it. At the bottom of the statement, Peter had added my final line in bold per my handwritten note. Being alone is better than being used. And that was it. The inheritance fantasy died right there in a law office under soft fluorescent lighting, not with a bang, but with truth. They walked out silent, not because they understood, but because they couldn't argue anymore. Their control was gone, and all that was left was the echo of everything they'd taken for granted. I didn't need to be there to watch it happen. Some endings are best enjoyed from a distance. Dolores told me it started with a slammed door. Kyle was back from his college's financial office with a folder full of bad news and a mouthful of blame. "No one told me the money was gone," he shouted. Paula snapped back. "Maybe if you hadn't laughed when she almost died, you'd still have a future funded." Daniel just stood there, rubbing his temples like he could squeeze a better version of the past out of his skull. Kyle didn't go back to class after that. And when his refund check didn't show up because the scholarship office confirmed the fund no longer existed, he finally understood. He wasn't punished. He was simply excluded. Dolores relayed all the whispered conversations at the grocery store, the sideways glances at church. "They said you disappeared," she told me over the phone, but I corrected them. "Oh," I asked, smiling into my tea. I said, "You withdrew investment from a toxic enterprise." I laughed so hard I had to set the cup down. Meanwhile, back at the lake house, the spiral deepened. Daniel started drinking again. Small at first, a beer with dinner, then wine, then whiskey. Paula complained to her sister that Mom's disappearance ruined everything. They never once used the word left. To them, I was still a ghost, haunting their narrative. I never existed as a woman who chose herself, just a figure who owed them more. But the neighborhood didn't buy their act for long. Word spread fast once Peter confirmed I was alive and well and had legally moved all my affairs. Old friends who used to nod politely at Paula now turned away at potlucks. Church members offered hollow smiles to Daniel, but no more invitations to speak at men's breakfasts. Their reputation began to decay, not from scandal, but from truth. You mock a woman in public and strip her worth in private, and people start to remember things. Who raised Kyle when his parents couldn't? Who funded their vacations with little loans? Who baked for every funeral, brought flowers to every wedding, and never asked for thanks? Me, and now I was gone. The social circle they depended on didn't collapse. It simply rotated without them. I didn't have to shout. I didn't have to defend. I just stopped contributing. Kyle's friends drifted away when he dropped out. His phone, once a weapon of constant judgment, stayed face down more and more. Daniel and Paula argued louder now, the fights echoing through a house that once smelled like my lemon cake. The fridge was often empty. The mail piled up. One night, Dolores called to say she'd heard Paula screaming on the porch. Something about how dare she take everything. But I didn't take everything. I left the curtains, the dishes, the keys, the silence. They still had each other. But I think they're starting to realize they liked me quiet because I carried the weight of their dysfunction in that quiet. Now the weight is theirs. And I'm here on my balcony, warm drink in hand, sun on my face, surrounded by people who say please and thank you without expecting anything in return. Let them sit in the silence, because it's not my job to fill it anymore. That evening, Dolores called. "They're spiraling," she said, words getting around. Paula's yoga friends are starting to whisper. One of them asked if you had dementia. I laughed. Not the polite kind, the freeing kind. "Well," I said, "I must be the most organized dementia patient they've ever seen." Dolores paused. "You sure you're okay with them thinking you're gone?" I stared out the window at the sun setting over a bed of marigolds. "I'm not gone," I said. "I'm just not available, because that's the truth, isn't it? They wanted me to be a quiet fixture in the background, always ready, never needed, convenient, disposable. Now I'm gone but not missing. They didn't lose me. They drove me out. And now that they can't find me, they're finally trying to listen. But it's too late for conversations. This isn't a standoff. It's a departure. And for the first time, they're not the ones choosing when it ends. Peter called it the moment the floor gave out. He'd gathered them into his office, the three of them, because they refused to believe it until they heard it from someone with a title. In a desk, Daniel came in tight-jawed. Paula wore her best "I'm about to play victim" cardigan. And Kyle looked like a little boy again. Not because he felt remorse, but because for the first time, the world wasn't bending to him. Peter had prepared a short statement per my instructions. No small talk, no explanations, just the truth. He slid the folder across the table, looked each of them in the eye, and said, "This is from Margaret Walker." Then he read, "To those who assumed my silence meant agreement, I gave everything once. I won't die twice," that line stopped them. "You took my time, my home, my peace. You drained me while telling others you were looking after me. You mocked me as I drowned, then wondered why I didn't come up gasping for your approval. So let me be clear. The university fund is gone. The inheritance has been restructured. The house will be donated. My assets will not go to those who treated me like clutter waiting to be cleared." Daniel apparently tried to interrupt, but Peter raised a hand. "She gave me full authority to read every word." He continued, "You will receive nothing from me in death because you gave me nothing of value in life, not love, not respect, not care. You loved my money more than you loved me. And now the money is with those who still believe in kindness." Paula, according to Peter, turned red and then white. Kyle muttered something under his breath, but no one listened. Peter told me Daniel stood up and shouted, "She's lost her mind," to which Peter replied, "No, she found it." When Peter sent me the full transcript later that week, I read it slowly. Sipping tea in the garden with my feet tucked under a blanket Dolores crocheted. Every word felt like breath, like oxygen. It wasn't revenge. It was recording. They had written the story. I just turned the last page. In their world, I was supposed to forgive quietly, give endlessly, and fade gently. But I didn't. I spoke. I left. I reallocated my love to those who still wanted it, not those who expected it. At the bottom of the statement, Peter had added my final line in bold per my handwritten note. "Being alone is better than being used." And that was it. The inheritance fantasy died right there in a law office under soft fluorescent lighting. Not with a bang, but with truth. They walked out silent, not because they understood, but because they couldn't argue anymore. Their control was gone, and all that was left was the echo of everything they'd taken for granted. I didn't need to be there to watch it happen. Some endings are best enjoyed from a distance. Dolores told me it started with a slam door. Kyle was back from his college's financial office with a folder full of bad news and a mouthful of blame. "No one told me the money was gone," he shouted. Paula snapped back. "Maybe if you hadn't laughed when she almost died, you'd still have a future funded." Daniel just stood there, rubbing his temples like he could squeeze a better version of the past out of his skull. Kyle didn't go back to class after that, and when his refund check didn't show up because the scholarship office confirmed the fund no longer existed, he finally understood. He wasn't punished. He was simply excluded. Dolores relayed all the whispered conversations at the grocery store, the sideways glances at church. "They said you disappeared," she told me over the phone, but I corrected them. "Oh," I asked, smiling into my tea. I said, "You withdrew investment from a toxic enterprise." I laughed so hard I had to set the cup down. Meanwhile, back at the lake house, the spiral deepened. Daniel started drinking again. Small at first, a beer with dinner, then wine, then whiskey. Paula complained to her sister that Mom's disappearance ruined everything. They never once used the word left. To them, I was still a ghost, haunting their narrative. I never existed as a woman who chose herself, just a figure who owed them more. But the neighborhood didn't buy their act for long. Word spread fast once Peter confirmed I was alive and well and had legally moved all my affairs. Old friends who used to nod politely at Paula now turned away at potlucks. Church members offered hollow smiles to Daniel, but no more invitations to speak at men's breakfasts. Their reputation began to decay, not from scandal, but from truth. You mock a woman in public and strip her worth in private, and people start to remember things. Who raised Kyle when his parents couldn't? Who funded their vacations with little loans? Who baked for every funeral, brought flowers to every wedding, and never asked for thanks? Me, and now I was gone. The social circle they depended on didn't collapse. It simply rotated without them. I didn't have to shout. I didn't have to defend. I just stopped contributing. Kyle's friends drifted away when he dropped out. His phone, once a weapon of constant judgment, stayed face down more and more. Daniel and Paula argued louder now, the fights echoing through a house that once smelled like my lemon cake. The fridge was often empty. The mail piled up. One night, Dolores called to say she'd heard Paula screaming on the porch. Something about how dare she take everything. But I didn't take everything. I left the curtains, the dishes, the keys, the silence. They still had each other. But I think they're starting to realize they liked me quiet because I carried the weight of their dysfunction in that quiet. Now the weight is theirs. And I'm here on my balcony, warm drink in hand, sun on my face, surrounded by people who say please and thank you without expecting anything in return. Let them sit in the silence because it's not my job to fill it anymore.